Gold stars to all of you for coming out to one of the first panels after Libera Awards. A little early, at least for me. We're really excited to be here for our panel entitled United We Create. And in a second, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to just introduce themselves quickly. But for context, I just wanted to lift up that when I started working with A2IM about 4 years ago, one of the things that Richard Burgess said clearly to me was that if we're going to do this, if we're going to up our game in terms of advocacy in Washington, we need to be authentic about it. We need to be authentic to indie. And that means embracing not just the label's perspective, but the fact that those labels are out there in the wilderness every day trying to succeed in a tough environment by building bonds with artists. It's kind of the differentiator. And so being here with some fantastic artists, advocates for artists, is in keeping with that. So before we kind of get into the program, maybe starting with you, Erin, just if everybody could go down the panel here and just say who you are, how you got here. The subway is not an acceptable answer, and then we'll get into it.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Erin McAnally. I am a songwriter. I am the executive director of Songwriters of North America as of January of this year. I used to work with Jen at Artist Rights Alliance. I've been an artist advocate for a long time, a creator advocate for a long time. So anything in the realm of collective bargaining sparks my interest. So that's part of why I'm here. When this bill was first introduced, which we'll get into, there's much more historical context from other folks on this panel. But when this bill was first introduced, I was very jealous as a songwriter myself, because songwriters are restricted in how we can collectively bargain, and we were not included in the first iteration, but for obvious reasons. But the further talks went on. Richard was a big proponent of getting songwriters included in that equation. So we're here because we're enlivened by that prospect and excited to have this conversation.
I'm Dan Navarro. I am a recording artist, songwriter, singer in films, voice actor in animation, and serial activist. I've been a working professional for over 40 years and have been a serial activist since 1999, most recently on the board of SAG-AFTRA, on the AFM SAG-AFTRA Intellectual Property Rights Fund, and was on the negotiating committee that led to the television and theatrical strike. And I chaired negotiations between the labels and the union. And I don't like sleep.
My name's Blake Morgan. I did take the subway here. I'm a recording artist and songwriter and record producer and multi-instrumentalist. And I founded ECR Music Group, an independent record label here in New York. And I've been an advocate since I accidentally stepped into being a grassroots organizer for musicians' rights with the I Respect Music campaign, which has grown to become the largest grassroots campaign in American music history. And I'm barely caffeinated enough for this, but I'm looking forward to it.
And you're working on it, right?
I'm working on it.
I'm Jen Jacobson. I'm the executive director of the Artist Rights Alliance, which is an artist-led nonprofit that fights for musicians to be treated and paid fairly. I am a singer by hobby and love, one of those frustrated artists who went to law school for some reason. And I think what I would say sort of theme-wise and what kind of juices me up about this job is that artists are really in need of transparency about what happens in the process and how their decisions are made that impact their livelihood, and a voice in those decisions. So transparency and choice or a voice are two of the big principles that we work on and what we'll be talking about a little bit today. Thanks, Josh.
Great, thanks. So presumably our blurb about the panel is what drew you all in. You probably saw some big words in there: monopolies, consolidation. These are things that we know are out there, and they have been part of the ecosystem for a long time. You've got legacy issues like the failure to provide a performance right for terrestrial radio for recording artists and labels. You've got streaming services like Spotify, that and others that are associated with the largest companies on the face of the earth, perhaps the history of the planet. And we have the mounting challenges of AI. Those are a lot of powerful adversaries for this little gang and the folks that we work with to take on. Maybe just for the group, when you think about what the challenge is, maybe who we're up against or what we're up against, what's central in your thinking?
I think as a musician, it's frustrating because we can't ever seem to address the crises of the present, let alone the crises of the future, because we still haven't overcome the crises of the past. And the terrestrial radio issue, for anyone who doesn't know, the United States is the only democratic country in the world where artists don't get paid for radio airplay. The only countries that share the United States' position in this regard are Iran and North Korea, which are definitely the countries we want to be. Rwanda has come around.
Have they?
Yeah.
Go figure.
Rwanda's come around. So Rwanda's ahead of us. But, and artists have never been paid for terrestrial radio royalties in the United States. Songwriters get paid as we should, not as much as we should, but artists don't get paid anything. And this has been backwards for 90 years. And that would not only bring an incredible amount of revenue into everyday musicians' lives, but it would certainly change my life as an independent and middle-class musician. We've been fighting for this for 90 years. We still haven't gotten it, but the American Music Fairness Act is an important step, which we must get past. But we're still talking about AM/FM radio royalties, which is what Frank Sinatra was lobbying Congress about 40 years ago. And now, of course, we're facing 400,000 streams on Spotify a month is what I need to get to earn minimum wage every single month. And of course, now we have the emergence of AI, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But that, to me, that's the frustrating thing, which is, and I'm sorry to get Greta Thunberg on everybody's ass in here, but my profession is burning to the ground. And we have 80% fewer songwriters than we did 10 years ago in the United States. We have 46% fewer professional musicians than we did 10 years ago in the United States. If we had 80% fewer steelworkers, there would be a national emergency with Senate hearings and the president would be addressing Congress. So we can't get to the crises of the present or the future until it's very difficult to deal with those crises when we haven't dealt with a crisis from 1930.
I want to address something you just said, because I think it's an important, when you said, I'm sorry for getting all Greta on you. Our community is looked at as crybabies if we are saying we're getting paid too little at streaming, we're not getting paid anything at terrestrial radio, and to have to fight for livelihoods at all, let alone people at the top of the food chain or in areas that are emergent like AI. That really resonates with me, what you said. And we say that that's our instinct, is to say, look, I don't mean it, because it's the eye rolling happens. Here they go again. Sorry, folks, this is what we're going to do. And it speaks to United We Stand. We don't all share the exact same perspective or the exact same goals, but we have much more in common than we do apart. And this is why we do this.
And, whether it's the big radio conglomerates, the DSPs, or some of these huge companies that are rolling out various AI platforms that are driven by other people's IP, whether it's music or otherwise, they're for-profit entities. They are out there to make money, and they invest a lot in having the influence that they have. And if McDonald's could run their business getting the bread and the beef and the tomatoes for free, they would. Right? And so we have to recognize that the status quo permits that, yes, despite the fact that the reason why people open up their Spotify app or turn on the radio in their car is to access the creations of this community.
And the problem is not only that these actors are so large, thank you, but that our voice is so small in some of these contexts. So we have in the streaming world, we have seen a great deal of bad deals and low rates. And in the context of independent musicians and labels, we don't have the ability to negotiate in a sort of collective, powerful way with these large streaming companies. This was the genesis of the Protect Working Musicians Act that A2IM and the Artist Rights Alliance helped put together with people from Congress a couple of years ago. And it got reintroduced this year with an added component to address AI and those large players, and also to bring in songwriters and publishers into the mix. And what that bill would do is say, hey, in the context of negotiating these deals, small players need to be able to talk to each other and have some leverage in the marketplace. Because currently, they can't do that because of antitrust laws. They can't talk to each other. They don't often know, back to my point about transparency, they often don't know what the deals are, what the licenses even look like for themselves. And so this is needed not only for, you were saying the past, present, and future, not only for the existence of these unfair deals that we see in the streaming world, but now as AI companies start to dominate the world of AI, and we're seeing our work used to train AI models without our permission. We're seeing voice clones and deep fakes made of our persona without our permission. And we're seeing the dilution of the marketplace because some of these players don't care about the quality of music. All these things are being used to train AI models that are then competing with us, against us in the marketplace. We need the ability to be able to go in there and negotiate collectively. So that's what the Protect Working Musicians Act would do. That's just another example of a piece of legislation that we need. And there are many others. I know you guys will talk about others, but the point is these players can take different forms, and the issue is, do we have the ability to talk to them and to have some leverage in the marketplace?
That solidarity is so important. It's truly a bummer as a creator for your life's work to be used as a loss leader for these giant conglomerates, right? They're not making like what's happening with Spotify. It's like, sorry, you're not making a profit and you're adding this new thing, but you can't do it on the backs of authors and songwriters. So we're exploring ways that we can partner with the authors to link arms and say, well, this is a huge problem these are two of the biggest art forms in the world, and you're setting yourself up long-term for a failure because it's not good for the consumer either. It's not a real price. They're not valuing art the way that it ought to be valued, and so long-term, it's not going to work for the business model. And so to have your life's work be caught up in that realm it's an impossible fight, and we have to stand together to make any movement.
There's a Spotify booth right outside this room, which is like Philip Morris having a booth at an anti-cancer convention, But we have to be real about it. I mean, that's what these people are. They're strip mining my profession as a recording artist, as a multi-instrumentalist, as a songwriter, and as a label owner, where all the artists on my label own their own masters. That booth out there is advertising Marquee, which is Spotify's in-system promotional set of tools, which you can use to promote your music inside Spotify, and all you have to do is give away all of your royalties to employ it. Part of the price of Marquee is that you don't make royalties on any of the streams that you get for having promoted it. I mean, this is Philip Morris. We all know, right? So it's absurd to me that we're letting these foxes in our henhouse at a convention like this. I really don't even know what they're doing here.
Never mind that right now, their bundling plan reduces royalties by bundling it with audiobooks. They're being sued. This really is.
What Erin and Jen do every day in fighting these motherfuckers is so heroic. They're so on the side of the angels. But even here in a convention or an event week that's for us, people who make music, to have the very people who are exploiting us is just, I walked in, I'm like I'm the weirdo who's going to walk up to them and be like, hi guys, what are you doing here?
Well, and that, just to build on that, obviously, you're angry you have a right to be angry. But what we need to do is have enough voice and power that we can encourage these players to have ethical and responsible business practice. We have to make it a market incentive for them to act in a way that respects artists. And we can't do that without, obviously we can't do that without
There's also a
legislative change.
curtain to get through. Blake, you said something in an interview that resonated with me. when the promotion of creativity is looked at as a goal, a purpose, but you said it's not about creativity, it's about artistry. And when you get into things like AI or the dumbing down of all of this through the streaming services and how they've reduced the payments, you're turning an art form into brown food product.
That's right. And God bless you for quoting this interview with me that came out yesterday. You made my caffeinated morning. Right. I think this panel is about unity and how we're the more we stand together, the more power we have against the Philip Morrises of music. And that's true. You know, I don't think that musicians really have a problem being unified. We're unified all the time. That's what rehearsal is. That's what an orchestra is. I've never met a songwriter who resented a recording artist from getting paid. I've never met a session player who's resented a recording engineer getting paid. All too often, outside of my heroes who are on this panel, all too often our acronym-laden organizational representatives are the ones who are not unified in representing musicians. I'm a recording artist and a songwriter. When I get my BMI check, the recording artist in me doesn't resent it. He just wishes that it was more. But the devaluing of all of the professions that I have to step into to stay alive as a musician comes from the vocabulary that we use as well. And creativity is one of those hilarious words to me. I didn't go to creator school for half my life. I didn't go to content school for half my life. I went to music school. And creativity right now is what these platforms encourage us to talk about. But musicians really, in my experience, aren't interested in creativity, which is about learning to make mistakes and be free in doing stuff. They're after artistry. That's what we're after, which is about mastery. And it's hard to gain mastery when you can't get paid in your own profession.
And expression.
And content, the moment that content and pipeline and user were allowed to be used in a sentence along with the word music or musician, the sewage-like environment that we find ourselves in began. I wish that we didn't talk about content and we talked about music. That would be a way that we could get unified really quickly. They're not users, they're listeners.
And now in the AI era, it's data.
Yeah.
I testified before the House Judiciary Subcommittee in May of last year on songwriter stuff, and basically said, my music is not data, it's not content, it's music. And what I expressed to them basically is that if you can't get a goosebump, you can't give a goosebump. So, you know, the AI is going to dumb down.
It's great.
We're not going to stop it, and I think the real challenge for us is, of course, the legislators, but it's the general public who largely doesn't care because they see our issues as arcane, or they see our issues as a bunch of wealthy artists belly aching, and it's not what it is. Blake said something earlier that I've been saying for 20 years. These are middle-class work issues about people needing to make livings and who can no longer make livings.
You know, one of the interesting things, well, first of all, Blake, thank you for saying what you said about unity within the entire music community, especially regarding advocacy in Washington. I can't tell you how many times I've heard some people in our ecosystem talk about the artist side, the quote unquote artist side of the copyright and the quote unquote songwriter side of the copyright.
It's absurd.
And we need to make sure that both sides of the copyright have a voice. We're all, people don't draw that line in their life experience and in the communities that they sit in their normal lives.
Right. And the place that I wish that we focused on more, and it's where I've tried to focus, is 20 years ago with Napster, where musicians found ourselves, the position we found ourselves in is that we were actually at odds with our own audience. Our own audience was like, why should you get paid? Fuck you, get a real job. And that's changed. So that's a little sliver of hope right there. The unity that we need is when music makers and music lovers stand together. And when music lovers say, hey, that's crazy, teachers should be paid and carpenters should be paid and bus drivers should be paid and musicians should be paid and tuba players should be paid and singers should be, songwriters and conductors. When that happens, when music lovers stand with music makers, then we have a winning formula. And that's the key for any civil rights struggle. And make no mistake, this is a civil rights struggle. This is about poor people and middle-class people getting paid instead of the people who are working at the Spotify booth, all of whom make more money than I do in a year. All of them make more money at that booth than I do in a year. And I do pretty well. So that is where we need unity. It's not the idea that violinists and cellists are at each other's throats. It's bullshit. But what I think has changed from an organizational level and from on an individual level is that our own audience is no longer saying derogatory things to us about advocating for our profession. The people that we're fighting against do, but that's to be expected, especially when the CEO of Spotify, and I'm very interested when you say, like, how do we work with because it's a very important point. How do we work with the very platforms that are strip mining our profession? We have to work with them to get them to understand. It's very difficult. I'd love to hear more about that because it's very difficult for me to imagine that that's possible when the founder of Spotify is the most successful music pirate in the history of the world. He founded uTorrent that became BitTorrent. And then he said, oh, if I copied and pasted the technology from this platform into a legal way where all the music is still free, I think I could really be a business person. And now he's worth $9 billion while Spotify doesn't make a profit. All of the executives at Spotify, by the way, just sold another $90 million of stock because their stock has been doing really well the last 3 months. So it's very difficult for me to understand how Daniel Ek and his company, when, I think we all heard last week when he said, basically musicians are complaining because the price to make content is basically nothing. So what's the big deal? And once again, I don't fucking make content. This is content.
Make art.
And I pay for me. I pay musicians.
I went to music school for 16 years to not make content, to make music so that I could have goosebumps and maybe be lucky enough to get somebody else to feel a goosebump or two. But it's very difficult for me to imagine working with those people when every time I've met with them and every time I've tried, they say things like, but we're saving the music world.
Yeah, well, I hear you, and that's another example of this unity piece. So let me give one small example, not that small. The Artist Rights Alliance put together this big artist letter, open artist letter a couple months ago that went out to platforms, AI developers, platforms, tech companies, saying, we demand that you act responsibly and ethically, right? And why would they do that? Why would they listen, right? That letter was signed by huge names, less known names, because it spoke to all kinds of artists. It's an existential threat that we've been talking about. We talk about these laws that we're advocating for, but this was a different path. This was getting the artists together to speak out. Not too long after that, a few weeks later, Universal Music Group and TikTok were able to make a deal.
Right.
Was that related? Don't know. Possibly. The Universal Music Group folks cited our letter as an example. There are ways we can have an impact just by saying we won't stand for you to not act responsibly. But it requires us to have a voice, and we can do that when we speak together. We can do that when the laws allow us to negotiate together. Is it always going to work? No. Are there always going to be bad guys? Yes.
Yeah.
But we have to figure out how to make the market incentives work so that the responsible players are the ones that win.
Thank God for you. And by the way, it is bad guys. It's bros. It's almost never women. And that's something I would just like to throw out there too. Because this week's AI bros, it's just true.
You're welcome.
It's true. And it's no surprise that Erin and Jen are on the other side, But this week's AI bros, this is the largest cultural appropriation in history since colonialism. This week's AI bros are just last week's NFT bros, and last month's cryptocurrency bros, and last year's Bitcoin bros, and last decade's blockchain bros, and last century's fucking music piracy bros. It's the same regressive, anti-artist motherfuckers.
I dig this.
Sorry, should I not have said mother? Anti-artist motherfuckers who are seriously uninterested in our institutions that hold up our society. Institutions, by the way, that have taken us millennia, hundreds, if not thousands of years to develop ideas of rights, of human rights, of property rights, of copyright, of rights of privacy. They're not interested in any of this. So make no mistake, these are anti-democratic, regressive, anti-artist bros. And they change their colors every time one of their schemes to fuck over artists and the magic that we can do that they can't do. Every time they run out of chits in whatever game they're playing, they switch the game. It's Web3. No, it's NFTs. No, it's Bitcoin. No, it's blockchain. AI is going to be great for creators and their content. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
You're just stealing our money in a different way. So you're right. It is bad guys, and it's almost always guys. Fuck those guys.
And you see, Blake, right?
Can't wait to bring you to a Hill meeting.
And in this corner,
These are
I don't
not.
talk this way when I meet with members of Congress.
These aren't startups, right? These aren't, innovators in their garage. These are enormous companies that are interconnected, that collude with each other.
Yes.
FTC, DOJ, investigating these big companies for exactly that. The reason why antitrust law exists in the first place in this country is because long ago, industrial barons got so powerful that they built the ability to crush society.
That's right.
And what we have now, the reason, Jen, I'd love for you to talk about the Protect Working Musicians Act, is an upside down situation where antitrust law protects these global behemoth companies at the same time that, technically speaking, Dan and Blake, if you guys were to look at each other's Spotify, royalty statements, you'd be violating antitrust law.
Right.
That's crazy.
It happens all the time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, Jen, our two organizations came up with this idea for this bill 2 or 3 years ago, before everybody was talking about AI. But it seems like more now than ever, it's really important to have a statement out there, to have something we're pushing for in Congress that talks about leveling the playing field so that our community can fight for itself. Because I think we've learned that the fight's not coming from anywhere but the folks on this stage.
Well, and I think this comes from a place of believing that the licensing system can work in the free market. We don't know yet. I mean, AI is still trying to figure out those business arrangements. Are we going to have what is the licensing going to look like? Is it going to be statutory license? Is it going to continue to be negotiated freely? We don't know. But assuming that we can do this in the free market, which I think generally is a positive way to look at things, we need to be able to do those things where we talk to each other, where we see what other deals people are getting, where small independent voices can work together and say, hey, if we don't get a good enough deal, we're not going to be on your platform. We're going to not allow you to use our music to train. Now, of course, technologically speaking, how are we going to stop people from scraping the internet and using our work? That's going to be fought out in the courts. And there's other legislation that will allow those court fights to happen, such as there's a bill right now that would require transparency in how you train your AI models. That will help us use that data in the courtroom to sue the people that are doing that without permission. But it all starts with the ability to talk to each other and work together, and not just allow the large voices, the major labels who represent great interests of the artist community, but they have a lot of power that the independent community does not have.
Yes, I was just going to say, with AI, collective bargaining is important on so many levels of the industry. With AI, to speak to what you were saying earlier, Blake, it's moving so fast that the AI developers don't even know how it's working, which is terrifying, right? And then we're expecting copyright law or the Copyright Office to catch up with that. They have to. We have to have some regulation around it. However, the industry being on the same page, especially not being siloed when you're talking about the recording industry and songwriters and all. We all have to be on the same page about it because regulation moves so slow. Even if we find regulation happening in the US, the international implications, if they're not regulated the same way in other places, those giant companies are just going to go there, right? Like there's so many issues around AI. If we're not unified, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be really bad. So these kinds of conversations are really important. One of the particular things that I'm concerned about is because I think I have some PTSD from Section 512 is carve-outs for safe harbor for these AI companies. Like if we're not unified as an industry, saying you cannot give these companies safe harbor to develop willy-nilly, they will carve that out for them.
That means protection from liability, basically saying you can do
AI
whatever.
is such a huge topic, partly because it's existential to artists, to creators, because we could cease to exist. SAG-AFTRA was successful in its TV theatricals in getting informed consent, and that means not only do you consent to being scanned as an actor, but you have to know how it's going to be used. Well, we'll scan you, but we can't tell you, fine, scan me. You have to pay me. We don't know how it's going to be used. Now we know. You're going to be a Nazi and you're going to cut the heads off of Jewish babies. Yeah, right, you can't use it. And that power is in there. But union actors represent one small portion of the universe. Non-union actors are out there. Non-union companies are out there. And that's even heavier in the record business.
My girlfriend said something the other day that is both chilling and hilarious to me. She said, and then I have a question for Erin. She said, if AI has seen The Matrix and The Terminator, we're doomed. Because those were our two best attempts to overthrow AI. And it's stuck with me. It's like if AI is like, oh yeah, this whole Terminator thing, you know what? Okay, we got to deal with that, and the Matrix thing. But my question, like, Erin, when you talk about like this is why we have to be united, I couldn't agree with you more. Who is it that is not united with us? In other words, when you say we're not united, who are we talking about?
Well, with AI, I think everyone's very confused. There's a lot of confusion around what it is, what it's going to look like, what the implications are for the sound recording versus the composition. I think right now that unification is based in a lot of confusion.
Okay.
But there is historical context to know that we have been divided in the past.
But who's the we? In other words, the only time I ever see a lack of unity is when music publishers say, you know what, it's all about the song. And then they found the Mechanical Licensing Collective and put publishers in charge. That's not unity. The MLC should have songwriters in charge because it's all about the freaking song, right? So, and then when recording artists say, well, songwriters shouldn't make as much money as recording artists because the investment is not the same. Well, the investment when I write a song is maximum. So where's the actual lack of unity? Because from my career provides me with this eagle eye perspective as an artist, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, record producer, label owner, and all of the musicians I work with and all of the musicians I know would welcome a SAG-AFTRA universe where we could all line up behind a leader who would actually take people to task. And when musicians saw Fran Drescher do what she did in those speeches and having that community behind her, it was both incredibly inspiring for me and incredibly sad because we do not have that. So I think when we're talking about unity, again, just to get our vocabulary straight, I don't think musicians suffer from a lack of unity, but it's so important for us to be united. I couldn't agree with you more. And the thin line between complete disaster and some hope, that line is manned by Jen Jacobson and by Erin and by SONA and by Artists' Rights Alliance and all of the other organizations who are on the side of the angels, no doubt about it. But when I hear that we're not united, so I'd like to know who's the entity that's not united with us and what we're talking about, because let's go get them. We don't have time to screw around anymore.
Let me say one thing, and then I have a question for Dan. There have been many instances in the advocacy community where different pieces of the music community are fighting for their little piece of the pie, a law change that will help this sector or that sector. And when we had this landmark legislation passed a few years ago called the Music Modernization Act, which got us a lot of things, a lot of great things, that only happened because people said, let's work together. You get your thing, I'll get mine. I might have to sacrifice here. I might have to sacrifice there. And that was unity that was born out of a need to get something all together. This may not be as much of an issue in the AI context because we are all fighting the same thing, and we're all combating, we're all fighting for our existence. So maybe we won't have that problem, but there, it's easy to break down into different interests. My question for Dan about this, is what lessons do you think we can take from the collective bargaining negotiations that you've done that we can maintain, like what you were saying, Blake, that unity, that togetherness that will allow us to move forward in this world?
The provisions that we got over AI came down to a costly, painful 4-month strike. We were at the 11th hour when industry was saying, we are going to start canceling series. We are going to start killing movies if you don't agree to this that we put before you. But they hadn't really done AI properly. They still weren't giving us the rights for dead people to have their estates or representatives give permission. They wanted a free rein to be able to use the images of dead people. They weren't giving us what we needed, and we were at the frickin' 11th hour. They had offered us $1 billion in gains. $1 billion. And we were going to go on record saying we're walking away from $1 billion. And we decided to say no. And the next morning, they came up with the provisions that we needed to say yes to the contract they put before us, or we were going to stay on strike. And a friend of mine, Jason George, an actor who's on Station 19, who was on the committee, saw his series get canceled. It's about the larger good. Hanging in and not taking the bad deal is part of it.
Right, but we don't have that ability, and I can't tell you how many people, when I give speeches or lectures, say, well, why don't we all just call a strike on Spotify? We're not allowed to. We're actually legally not allowed to do that because we're all independent contractors with Spotify. And just getting back to MMA, which is a huge victory for people in music, but not everybody in music, because part of the thing that united everyone was that we're going to get all this stuff done, but not the American Music Fairness Act. We're all going to agree that the terrestrial radio catastrophe will continue for another. The price was the thing I've been fighting for the most the last 10 years. We got all these things, but it was a publisher's party, and and that's the last thing that they care about. I just don't want to use the word community, because it's not the publisher's community. It's the people who are in charge of the organization representing that community. And that's what Hollywood seems to have gotten right, and what music, to me, has not gotten right, which is that the gatekeepers at those organizations, unfortunately, have their own, there's a scientific term, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's called cock blocking with each other. And that's what they're interested in. We all joke that these are the uncles of music, the various uncles of music, all fighting for their cock blockery while we're not getting paid. And that's what I think we're so hungry for. That the SAG-AFTRA victory is so unbelievably important for this country and for this world and for everyone who makes art anywhere. We need that in music. And that's not to say that MMA isn't important and all the pieces of it and all the other victories that we've won since then. But we're not going to again, we can't seem to get to the crisis of the present or the future because we're still catching up, because the very people who are supposed to be in charge of this fight, I'm not supposed to be in charge of this fight. Neither is Dan. We're supposed to be making music. I'm a reluctant activist, but it's necessary anyway. It's necessary in spite of all that, because what am I going to do? I've got to speak up and speak out, right?
I want to point out, by the way, just really quickly, I chaired the negotiations between SAG-AFTRA and the 3 major labels and Disney, and we got similar AI protections of informed consent, compensation, use only on the specific project. But SAG-AFTRA represents a small sliver of the artist community when it's dealing with only those who are on major labels. And the independent world is so big, we don't have any authority to do anything about that. It's hard. So there is so much more work to be done.
So a couple observations. One, E2IM was so outraged at the terrestrial performance right being left behind in the MMA that I'm sitting here on this stage. It is the reason why E2IM's upped its game in terms of advocacy. Absolutely. And stepping in, 1. 2, group boycott sounds really scary. One of the reasons why it's scary is that it's presently illegal.
That's right.
And so the Protect Working Musicians Act would change that. Third, you have to follow the through lines of the story the big guys tell. the radio conglomerates tell this story, there's this publicity value, and therefore we don't have to pay you for your music. And then Spotify comes and says, hey, you know what we'll do? We'll knock down your royalties in exchange for boosting you in the algorithm, which is great publicity for you.
It's exposure, but people die from exposure.
And I can guarantee you that soon in the future, the AI companies will begin making the same argument.
Of course.
Saying, hey, artist XYZ, it's going to be great publicity value for you if we make a fake song with your voice in it. Consumers are going to love it, and then they're going to go to Spotify and find your real music. It is not going to happen, or it certainly is going to happen on a scale that's going to allow for working class musicians to make a living. We need to keep an eye on that, and we also need to keep an eye on the fact that if the AI licensing marketplace that Jen referenced is going to work, it needs to work for everybody. It needs to work for rights holders of all sizes. If you're one of these big AI companies and you want to license music to make other music, you can just go to Universal and you can gobble up a license for enough rights to make music that's good enough for people that don't really give a shit about music, or for me when I leave my house in the morning and I put on some, Pandora station for my dogs.
Pandora for Dogs, a new channel.
That's what Pandora's for, folks.
It's all, guys, Silver Lining, it's always reggae. Dogs love reggae.
The intent of the SAG-AFTRA provisions, I don't want to sit there and here and laud them like they've saved the world, but we were successful, and by the way, partly it was Fran Drescher and Duncan Crabtree Ireland, who were solid in making sure this happened, was to make using our actors and our singers and our voiceover people's work more expensive. The whole idea was, you got to pay us, so it's going to be just as expensive, if not more expensive, to create an AI version of me than it is to just use me. And if you're going to pay me to be in a movie and I'll sit at home and be in another movie at the same time, cool. But that's how we have to figure out how to get it.
And the AI companies can't have it both ways. Sam Altman has been on the Hill, testified about the administrative burden that comes with having to track down millions of rights holders in order to actually license stuff. Yet at the same time, the law makes it such that they'd have to do it that way.
Which is what Google says about YouTube. In other words, my job as a label president apparently is to sit at my desk for 8 hours a day and issue takedowns on YouTube for, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, because they can't police their own platform that they created.
They are making it whack-a-mole for us on purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
But we can't stop. Just because it's whack-a-mole, if that's what we've got, then let's whack the fucking moles.
It comes down to exactly what you said, Dan. We have to be able to say no to a bad deal, which we currently cannot in all contexts. And independent musicians and labels need to be able to do that.
Yeah. The single most important and productive thing that A2IM does for me will knock you out. It's how I get my health insurance. I get my health insurance through A2IM. That's actually how it affects me and my family the most. It is an incredibly important thing that A2IM does in the midst of all the things that A2IM does. That's the most significant. And I tell this story all the time. It'll just take a second. I've met with many members of Congress, but there's this one meeting I always reference. I'm sitting there and I'm talking to this member of Congress and I'm saying, this is a middle class issue. I have a mortgage to pay. I have health insurance to pay. And I started to go on and he sat up and he went, wow, you have a mortgage. And it was so awkward. And before I could say anything, he said, really courageously, he said, forgive me for how naive that just sounded. But we don't hear that up here on the Hill. They trot in stars to meet with us, and we're sort of, gobsmacked about that. But what we do here on Capitol Hill is we trumpet the middle class every day. And here you sit. You sit, Blake, you're an example of a middle class person in your profession who needs to pay his mortgage and needs to pay his health insurance. And it was a really brave moment for that member of Congress to have an aha moment right then when he had said something so unbelievably stupid and then turn around. And that's the best meeting I ever had on the Hill because something actually changed in his brain and said, right, this is a middle class issue. So A2IM is also on the side of the angels. The most important function that it provides me is my health insurance.
On the heels of this, I want to share something that happened in Chris Cannon's office about 15 years ago. He couldn't meet with us. So I was there with part of a group, and this is a middle-class work issue. And I looked at him, I said, imagine your world populated by no one but interns and elected representatives. And he nodded because he realized I meant his job. Him as chief of staff would not work if the middle class goes away. You'd have interns who will work for free because they're learning, and the elected representatives who are covered. In our world, it's rookies and superstars, and they will continue to exist.
Which is what David Byrne predicted 15 years ago in his book. He said, in the future, all we're gonna have are superstars and acclaimed amateurs.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, I'd love to give
Merry
you the
Christmas,
last.
everybody.
Erin, I'll give you the last word. Where do we go from here? How do we make the most of the time that we have?
On this panel, or no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, we don't have. We're in negative. We're in negative
we're
territory
negative?
on this
We have a
panel.
full
So
room.
let's
We
talk
keep going.
about.
Second encore.
Yeah. What comes next? How do we walk out of this room and make things better?
We stand united. That's a big question, Josh. Well, we're in constant contact. Join us. We're always talking about these things. If there are things that are heavy on your mind, find us, because we do have to stand united. And I think that the next few months in particular, as the Copyright Office is sort of getting to the end of their study, all of these things are happening.
It's on the AI studies.
Yes, the AI study, sorry. And everything that's going on with Spotify. It's just a really important time for these conversations to be happening. That was not a brilliant way to end the panel.
No, but it's right. It's every day.
Yeah,
it's
it is-
every
it
day,
is
and
every
it's
day.
all of us.
Yeah.
So
We can start by not using the word creator, musician. We can stop using the word content, it's music. We can stop using the word pipeline, it's a platform. We can stop using the word user, they're listeners. And we can all go over to the Spotify booth right after this and ask them why they think it's there's merit or it's virtuous that I need 400,000 streams a month to make minimum wage. Let's go.
Bravo.
all right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll stick around.